Club lovers, it is such a pleasure to be with you on this special rescheduled live with Ms. Sue Nyathi. And we are broadcasting me from Zimbabwe, her from South Africa. This morning, the time is 10:05, and we're happy to be with you. So those of you that can join, please let us know where you're watching from and what you would like to know from Sue as we embark on this conversation. Welcome to those of us watching from YouTube and those of us watching from Facebook. So without further ado, let me greet our special guest. Hello, Sue. How are you?
Good morning, Selena and our audience. I'm good, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, on this Monday morning. Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. I'm excited.
We are excited to have you on the show. What's the weather like in Joburg?
It's hot. It's very hot. So we've been in the thick of summer now. So yeah, high temperatures, which is nice. I mean, we last week was very cold and rainy, so it's a welcome reprieve.
That's awesome. Here, it's starting to get a bit cloudy. We've had the most incredible heat for most of October. So we've been waiting for the rain with a lot of patience. Yeah. And now it is, we're seeing clouds, we're feeling wind, and we're starting to get really, really excited. So, I hope that rain comes for us here and for our friends in South Africa. So, as is our custom, when we start a book club discussion, we always start with a quote from an African authority or an author. And today's quote that we've picked for you, Sue, is from the former president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And the quote is, "Ethnicity should enrich us. It should make us a unique people in our diversity and not be used to divide us." And when I saw that sentiment, it made me think of the book that we're going to be discussing today during our interview, The Gold Diggers. It really made me think about a lot of the stories that I read in there, and the things that bring us together and can connect us and make us feel like home when we're far away, and the things that can also divide us, even from our nearest and dearest who are most like us. So that's our quote for you today. For those of us who are yet to meet or know the fabulous Ms. Sue Nyathi, let me tell you a little bit about her as we start the interview. Sukoluhle is a Nguni name that means beautiful day, born on the 23rd of June, 1978, which was a beautiful day as you describe your debut into the world in the city of Bulawayo. In her words, she says, "I started my primary schooling at Tennyson, which I completed at Carmel. It is here that my inclination towards writing began to show at the age of 10, when I would cut out pictures from magazines and write little excerpts about the men and women in the pictures. I did my secondary schooling at Girls College, which is where my writing really took root. I was 13 when I penned my first novel titled Crazy Over You, inspired by the Sweet Valley High series, which is what I was reading at the time." Very good choice, Sue. "My interest in writing was further nurtured through high school, where I wrote a lot of poetry. This passion was reflected in my participation in poetry competitions, for which I won several awards and accolades. However, paradoxically, it is prose, namely fiction writing, that has captured my heart. On completing my Cambridge A-levels, it was my intention to study journalism, but at that time there was no such degree on offer in any Zimbabwean institution of higher learning. So ironically, I found myself reading towards a degree in finance at the National University of Science and Technology. I later completed a master's degree in finance and investment at the same institution. I have a career spanning over 10 years in finance investments and over 5 years in economic development consulting. My career in finance never stifled my creativity, as I continue to write after hours to escape the drudgery of economic shop talk and financial markets. I was a freelance writer for the Steaming Off column in the Sunday Mail, a local weekly in Harare. The column is something akin to the Carrie Jones column in the Sex and City series. Many of my articles concerning love and relationships were popularly received. I've got a lot of responses through my emails as total strangers poured out their hearts to me about personal ordeals they were going through. Some merely posted suggestions that I should write a book. By this time, I had written several books, none of which had been published. A Family Affair is one such manuscript, which finally saw the light of day in 2020. I plan to redevelop a lot of my older manuscripts in the coming years. I relocated to Johannesburg in 2008, which is the same time when my characters in The Gold Diggers embarked on the journey to South Africa. My move here precipitated in me pursuing the idea to get published more vigorously because there was a more vibrant literary and publishing industry. Hence, the debut novel, The Polygamist, published in 2012, and the rest is history, as they say. So to date, there is now The Polygamist, The Gold Diggers, A Family Affair, and most recently, you also edited a book about secrets. So, in your own words, tell us why it is you chose to write and publish these particular novels. What was it that propelled you to have these particular stories in the public space?
Okay, so I kind of always think of myself as a social anthropologist of sorts, yeah. So I kind of like to chronicle social issues in my books, and you'll see that it's a common narrative through all of them, whether they edited, particularly the last one, the nonfiction editorial, which looks at gender-based violence, which has become a pervasive social phenomenon. So yeah, I like to write about social issues, that affect us, and I feel like, in a way, my books will capture that for other generations to come. It's a way to show how people lived at a certain particular time, and I think The Polygamist also is a reflection of Harare at a certain particular point in time and history as well. So I think every one of my books, like The Gold Diggers, tracks illegal immigration from Zimbabwe to South Africa, and which has become a very problematic issue. So it's chronicling those kind of stories, those journeys, and once again, like, it's for reflection. And I think as much as historians can capture in an academic way, as novelists we can also capture it in an entertaining way, but it's also informative as well. So we both do the same sort of job in a sense. So that's what I aim to do, like, just encourage discourse around social issues.
Definitely. I mean, there in all of the books, there is a very important topical social conversation happening, just about who we are becoming and who we are choosing to be. So I find that very, very powerful and very, very interesting. So just still in the vein of how this all came about, at what point did you feel or sense that this is a vocation for you? And that feeling of, yes, I can actually do this, because I think one of the things that often stifles writers in terms of their confidence to get their story out, sometimes it's the environment, which we've heard from your bio. It was easier in a sense to publish in South Africa, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's also an inner journey where the writer has to have that conviction that, yes, actually, I have a voice, and I should be using it. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily come with somebody saying you have a voice. What was that moment like for you? When did the spark sort of take off and you were like, this is something I should be doing, and I'm going to do it?
So I think it probably happened. Look, I've always known what I wanted to be a writer, right? That I've known. I had no doubts about that from a young age. But as most writers, we always in doubt of our capabilities and am I really good? And so when The Polygamist came out and it was well received, right? It was kind of, it was like, okay, this is possible. But because the other thing was, this Polygamist was self-published. I struggled to get a publisher for it. So, and there's always something about self-published work. People always look down on self-published writers, like you didn't quite make the cut, or, there's always, question marks around your work. So when my second book, The Gold Diggers, was published by Pan, and also, to much critical acclaim, then I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was convinced, all right, that, yeah, definitely, this is the path for me. And, incidentally, that's 2018 is when I left, the world of finance to write full time. So I guess that was probably the turning point in terms of, yeah, I really want to do this, and I'm going to apply myself to the writing fully. Yeah, because up until then, I had a job, a full-time job, and I was just writing on the sidelines. And you can see, The Polygamist came out in 2012, and The Gold Diggers in 2018. There's this huge timeline because of juggling various things in between. But, after The Gold Diggers, then A Family Affair came out in 2020, because I dedicated, those years just to writing that book. I wasn't doing anything else but writing. So yeah, I guess that would have been, for me, that was really the turning point, that, maybe, let me be purposeful and, walk in my purpose, which is to write.
And I think that is powerful, because many people dream of being able to write full time and still be able to take care of themselves. So I think sometimes when you find that groove, it's almost a confidence and an affirmation that you're on the right track. And what I love about your story is that it's a journey. But The Polygamist, although self-published, is still a huge favorite for many people who have been longtime fans of your brand. And around about the time Gold Diggers came out, there definitely seemed to be an inclination towards crossing over from just having it as a novel to getting rights for it to be made into a movie or into a series. And you are no stranger to that crossover, because you've also been writing for broadcast as well. So what has that transition been like? And what are the stark contrasts, and in what ways is it amazingly beautifully the same?
So short TV writing, we call short form, is different from long form, and TV writing is more visual, as opposed to novel writing, because you can get into characters' head, whereas on TV you need to be able to show that. It's more about the exposition than being inside people's heads. So that's more challenging on the screen. And with writing long form, you've got more liberties. You can describe things. You can just go to town. Whereas with TV, if it's 30-minute episode, it's a 30. You have to show everything in that. There's that time constraint. Even whether it's a feature film, you still have 60 minutes, and to show everything. Whereas with novels, you can go years, and do decades even. So yeah, they're very two different things. And I didn't I got into TV writing it was accidental. I say that, but now with hindsight, I don't think it was an accident, right? I always think everything is purposeful, it's intentional. You are guided into things. You might think it's an accident, then it felt like it, because I wasn't trained for TV. I wasn't trained as a script writer. So what happened was, with The Polygamist, a producer, he's a film producer and director, Koli Nigiwe, read the book, loved it, and then he wanted to buy the rights, the film rights. And so it was through our relationship that he drew me into TV, because initially he was like, let's write the script together for The Polygamist. And I was like, I don't know how to write. I'm not a script writer. And he was like, no, you're a writer. You can write. Trust me. And he got me the software, and we started writing. And he taught me, how to do script writing. And so we started with the adaptation of my book. And then later on, when they were working on a series called Matatiele, he asked me to join the writers' room. And incidentally, at the time I was on maternity leave, so I wasn't doing anything. So I was like, sure, I'll jump in. And that's how I got into television writing. And and I'm now back into that as well, because it also is a way for me to supplement my income whilst I write. So when I say I'm writing full time, I'm just trying to do work that lends to creativity, and that's in line, with what I'm doing now. So that's how I started, and incidentally, I'm back in that vein. And I always think that maybe I shouldn't have left and gone back into corporate. After 2015, I should have just stayed, because I feel like the universe was pushing me in that direction. But you know what? Like when you're not quite sure yet, you tend to want to go towards what's comfortable. Change is uncomfortable, disruption is uncomfortable, and we often try and avoid it. And we like the familiar. So yeah, so I'm now back, and I think that's where I was supposed to have been all the time. That's what I was supposed to have done. But yeah, I was guided back to where I am. So that's why I'm saying it's an affirmation for me that I'm on the right path. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so
I love that. Yeah, that's so inspiring.
Yeah. So I think The Polygamist has been optioned for film, and more recently, The Gold Diggers has been optioned also for film. So, I mean, one of the things people say about my writing is that it's very visual as well. So it also lends itself nicely for screen adaptations. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm saying, I think it makes sense for me to play in both those spheres now. So yeah, that's why I say I'm where I'm supposed to be now. Yeah.
And yeah, I love that both books are making that transition into the screens, because I always find that books will gather a cult following from readers, whom I find are quite a loyal, committed community. And then they find a different audience when they're translated on screen. And sometimes those then convert to being readers, because they're like, I have to go and find the book. But we're also in a very amazing season right now, where we are starting to see many of our much loved modern popular African fiction making it to the screens. And I think that that's really something that's quite powerful and amazing for a younger generation of little brown and boys and girls who need to see their stories in their skin, on mainstream TV. But you've got a really formidable body of work. There's no way we could talk about each book in the way that we would like to. So I had to make a difficult decision, and I thought we would today talk about Gold Diggers. But for those of you that are watching, we are going to do a book review, just us in the book club, towards the end of the month, on a family affair. And when we do that book review, we will also be doing a giveaway of that book for anyone who has not read that book. So please keep following the pages. We will do a book review on a family affair, and you will be able to win a giveaway. So while we have Sue with us today, and we can only have her today, we're going to still be reading her works on the book club, and we will be reviewing a family affair. So please grab a copy. You can also get a copy of The Gold Diggers, any of you watching in Harare, from our favorite Mr. Books Fantastics, and he's got a Facebook page, so you can look him up on Facebook. He will deliver, he will bring to you, and he's actually got most of Sue's work. He's got A Family Affair and The Gold Diggers is currently in stock. If you would like any of the three books, you can also get them on any of the retailers that are mentioned on Sue Nyathi's website, so that is suenyathi.co.za, or you can also get them on Amazon in both Kindle or print on demand Amazon. And when you do read the books, please, please, please look it up on Goodreads and add to the reviews. The more that we review, the more that we amplify the voices of our African female authors. So without further ado, Gold Diggers. It's a story set in 2008 at the height of Zimbabwe's economic demise. And as a Zimbabwean, 2008 is a year that will live in the infamy of most of our minds for many Zimbabweans for many, many reasons. And in this book, you start us off that there are a group of passengers who board a Toyota Quantum, and they go on a treacherous expedition to the city of gold. It's treacherous because they're not going through the usual channels. And
Yes.
as we see in the first part, which is entitled Exodus, we begin to understand why they're not using the first channels. And that's related to the time period in Zimbabwe's history as much as to the personal circumstances for some of the people in the car. They've paid a high price for the dangerous passage to what they believe is a better life, an escape from the vicious vagaries of their present life in Bulawayo. In their minds, the streets of Johannesburg are paved with gold. So there's a lot of reference to Igoli, the city of gold. And they will have to dig deep to get close to any gold, dirtying themselves in the process. And I think, as we will discuss later when we look at the different characters, much of that is also an internal journey, a surprising internal journey, if you read the book. Told with brave honesty and bold description, the stories of the individual immigrants are simultaneously heartbreaking and heartwarming. And so that's a little bit about the gold diggers. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're in Harare and you want a hard copy, get in touch with Mr. Book Fantastics. If you are outside of Harare and in South Africa, you can look up suenyati.co.za. There are the list of retailers carrying the books there, and you can make an order there. Or you can check on Amazon, and don't forget to put a review on Goodreads. We've got Refilwe Banda joining from Facebook. Hi, thank you for joining us. Can't wait for the series movies to come out. We can't wait either. And we're probably going to have a watch party when they do. So, Sue, the Gold Diggers. This story is told over quite a big period of time. We start in 2008, but we traverse years. We also traverse
Geography.
capital cities and countries and continents during that period of time. And the story is told through multiple narrative points of view. So we start with Malusi the shepherd, and then we start to unpack each story of his different passengers. How did you juggle managing so many different points of view? Because I've read books where you hear from his perspective, her perspective, but this was a lot. There were a lot of storylines and told in their own voices or from their perspectives. How did you manage that to keep true to each different person's story?
So initially, when I started, conceptualizing the book, I didn't want to tell a single story because with migration, even illegal migration, there's no one single story. So there were many that I identified, right? Multiple strands of how people live and their motivations, right? And so I wanted to tell each of those stories, and not just tell one story. So I think that made it more relatable, with the different characters. So for me, it's like I enjoy writing multiple characters. I mean, I did that with The Polygamist, A Family Affair, and I'm always accused of having too many characters, but I don't know. I think I do it well, But it's just a question of switching, and immersing myself into that character. It's like when I'm writing that character, and so when I conceptualized the book, I thought it should be short, like they should be like short stories, right? Each person's story is a short story. But then I was like, I can intertwine them, and weave them together so that they all come together. And that's how you have their paths crossing throughout the book, so that just to show that, they came together as well. So yeah, so that's how that was the plan from the beginning, and then have their paths cross, and then we drop some characters, and then I know, they some stories are incomplete, and that was deliberate as well, because there are people who have come to South Africa and whose journeys we don't know how they ended. They just disappeared. And as you know, people come and assume a new identity. If they die, how do they contact the next of kin? So you don't know if they're dead or alive. So that was deliberate to show that there were some journeys, that are inconclusive. So, I left the readers hanging. So that was deliberate as well. So some were conclusive. You saw the end, how it, started and finished. So yeah. So it was just to show the different parts of people coming in.
So I love what you said about intertwining characters, because that, I think, caught me off guard as I was reading the book. Like I had no, I was pleasantly surprised to see how when their paths crossed, many people who were connections were used to drive the story forward. So if we look at, for instance, Dumisani as a character, when we first meet him, he presents a certain narrative. He's got his beautiful wife whom he loves and adores, and they're kind of like your middle class dream, or they are a typical Zimbabwean middle class dream. Even the professions that they took, and how he was sort of the golden boy in his family, and then we see him his character tested, and we begin to see a personality flaw of maybe having that kind of sort of automatic entry into privilege sort of catch up with him in the choices he makes when he finally makes it to Johannesburg. So he's a very interesting character. But I loved the fact that his uncle then becomes this critical player in driving the narrative forward. He intersects with Givemore. They do what they're doing. He comes
Yes.
back later in the story at a critical moment in Dumisani's life.
Yes.
And you meet these people, and even the description of him, holding on to the curly perm, his life, a lot of the dysfunction in his life. He's actually really a very colorful character who is not quite lovable, but strangely very somebody whom you can have a certain amount of affection for. And he is Malume Jackson is somebody whom we, I think, are pleasantly surprised by in terms of how he's used in the story. Same with Portia's narrative, and who she ends up with. Not trying to give too much away, because I'm always accused of that on the book club, but how that sort of culminates towards the end. So very interesting. I found that very interesting, because when they arrived, I thought, these guys are coming from so many different, they're being driven by so many different things. There's no way they're going to meet each other. But then they do. Even the connection between Chamu and Dumisani, and the friendship that was developed there, and them finding home in each other in their journey was very, very interesting to me. So I think there were a lot of characters, and I was scared. I was like, Sue, there are too many people. Are we going to get it? Are we going to make it? But every person was true to their narrative. Sometimes in very, very tragic ways, and other times in very sort of very heartwarming underdog ways. So I found that very, very interesting. But also, the story is about migration. It's about finding a better life, and how sometimes that's not as simple or straightforward, easier said than done, to a point. But in the story of migration, these characters are moving through different periods of their life. So people like Chennai, for instance, and Landani do a lot of traveling in the book, due to the various opportunities that they find, which people will have, I think, very different sort of opinions about whether those are opportunities. Was that on purpose? Did you want to mirror the migration story and show how much movement there is in life in general? Was the what was the motivation for so many settings and contexts? I mean, we do Zimbabwe. So in Zimbabwe, we've got Bulawayo. That's a main scene setting. But we've also got snippets into Harare, in Johannesburg, and smaller towns as people, give their backstories. Then South Africa, we've got Johannesburg, we've got Cape Town. People also go to London, the UK. That's a lot of scenes with a lot of characters. So how are you juggling that? Have you been to all of these places, and what were you trying to share with the audience?
Yeah, so yes, I mean, I have been to the UK, and there's also a large Zimbabwean population there, and so I also wanted to just touch on that thread of migration, through Dumisani's wife, when she uses she goes the UK route. So people have they've moved. A lot of people have moved, right? And I found that with a lot of books, we focus on Africa, to the west. That's the most common sort of narrative in terms of migration. But I also wanted to focus on migration in the on the continent, which is represented by the movement from Zimbabwe to South Africa, because that's also been a strong movement, and it didn't start now. This is something I wanted to point out, that people have been moving across for years. My grandfather worked, in the gold mines. There was a period called Wenela when they used to recruit, migrant workers to come and work in the gold mines. So my grandfather worked in that period, and he used to also transverse and come, and he left my grandmother in Zim. And so it was a question of, he would come here, maybe work 2 years, and then go back, one Christmas, get her pregnant, he's back. Maybe he won't be back again for another 2 years. So that wife being left behind was interesting for me. And it's still happening. Though now the difference is we find that most of the wives are opting to also follow the husbands, which is something that didn't happen in my grandmother's time. So that's why I was keen that Portia's journey to follow the husband here was important, to reflect that, a lot of women don't want to be, those long distance marriages anymore. And so they also come on their own journey. And so that was how Portia's story evolved, to show that breed of women who are now moving and coming across. And, Portia, against all odds, decided she's going to make it, even if whatever it takes. Exploitation is a very big theme, which is very prevalent in migration, especially illegal migration, because you live outside the law. You are illegal, so you don't have the same protection that legal migrants have. So that's why, exploitation is very prevalent in the book, and how it plays out, and how the characters also try and exploit these circumstances for their own good, and in whatever way they can. I mean, Portia did something illegal as well, but it's survival of the fittest. I mean, so the motivation for writing this book was, when I moved here in 2008, it was like just before the beginning of the xenophobic violence that broke out in Alexandria. And, after that, we continued to see more violence erupting. And there was always this discourse around, but what are foreigners doing here? Why don't they go back to their own countries? I mean, you even see it now. And there's a common, the correlation. So when the economy tanks, like it did in 2008, also the anti-xenophobic sentiment rises. And it's the same now, because, the economy is in the doldrums. So you also have the rise in anti-foreigner sentiment. So, it was easier for me to answer that question. I mean, a lot of people will call on radio, but, with the 2-minute sound clip, you can't really say much. So I thought, let me write a book that will address why people move, and move across, and just follow the different journeys, because the motivations are different for different people. And I think a lot of South Africans have said, it's a book that has made them appreciate and be more empathetic towards foreigners, and understanding, whether it's the domestic worker in their homes or the waiter who serves them in a restaurant. It's that understanding of, how they've come, why they're here. And that was part of, my motivation for writing the book as well.
So I was quite intrigued by the title, The Gold Diggers. Because of the cover and, the woman in dusty gold.
Yes.
I did, when I first sort of picked up the book, think, we're going to be talking about those types of women. And then quickly saw from the get-go, the parallel there was with the gold rush in the Wild West. And so the desperation, of people who are the abject sort of, I don't want to say poverty, but things are so bad, things are so desperate. You have to go, and you've got to take this risk and face danger and go and literally dig for gold. And then many times in the book, as we follow people after they've crossed over, that's what it feels like. So there's the desperation of them searching for this rumored better life. And I found that very, very interesting, because it ended up being a mirror for people's personalities and people's character flaws. So a lot of people who, like I was mentioning earlier, you would think we're going to get it right. got it very, very wrong and
Wow.
didn't actually learn their mistakes and continued to have those flaws follow them through. So I found that a little bit of like a parable. But then there were people who surprised us, and as you mentioned earlier, Portia was one of those people who surprised me because in at the beginning, in terms of her story, there were aspects where she was already being exploited. In her first marriage, she was in an underage sort of relationship. It wasn't right. She
Mm-hmm.
married, her school teacher,
School
and
teacher.
then she was
Mm-hmm.
abandoned.
Mm.
And basically as a teenager, and then um, you get into this situation where, as she's leaving, you're like, oh, but Portia, you're also having this other little side relationship, and what's going on there? And
Mm.
you realize that she's not what you think she is. She's
Yes, yeah.
not a submissive, because
Mm.
the first time we actually see her, Malusi describes her as one of these innocent sort of, the village girl with this innocent look.
Mm.
She looks so naive. But when she tells her own story, you're like, oh, Portia. And then
Yeah.
when she gets to Johannesburg, she's making decision after decision. And some of them, like you said, she does choose to do something that is illegal. But most of them, you're like, way to go, Portia. Way to bounce back, way to be resilient, and way to keep. And so she, for me, was one of the more heartwarming characters because I was like, wow, okay, so she's clear about her motivation. She's clear about the life that she wants, and she goes, and it does pay off
Mm.
in increasing dividends over time. So she was very, very heartwarming for me, and quite an interesting illustration of finding the gold. And because she found
Mm.
it relationally, but she also found it materially in the
Financially.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, financially in the book. But then in sharp contrast, because I keep going to Dumisani, for me, he was a little bit of a trashy character. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how much more can you slide into your own self-pitying story of your own failure? And
Yeah.
yes, these things are unfair. These things are hard. But there's also a way in which you're not taking responsibility.
Disability.
So
Yeah.
very, very interesting. The whole concept and the idea of looking for gold, digging for gold. But I feel like Portia had the gold inside of her, and the experiences were just excavating that and
It's in
bringing
the
that to the fore and polishing it
yeah.
out. Um, were you also like when you started the book? Did you think Portia's going to go here, Dumisani's going to go here, or did you start writing and then the characters said, "Sue, this is where I want to go"?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, it was one of those books like where like I didn't really like plan it to the T. I just knew I had to get them to Johannesburg. And what I wanted to show was, a lot of the times people think life here is rosy, egoli,
Mm,
it's gold. They think it's golden. And it really isn't. It's really quite gritty for a lot of people. And like you say, the gold, is not just about money. It's also about the friendships, the relationships, because a lot of people have found that their success has been through it's been relational. A lot of their opportunities have been through those kind of relations, and doors opened because
yeah.
of the relationships forged with other people. And like you rightly pointed out, the title, The Gold Diggers, I mean, Johannesburg was built on gold, on the gold rush. And
Mm-hmm.
people still come here, many years later. They're not digging gold from the ground, but they still want to scour it from the economy and just get prosperity from it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's the elusive dream, I think, that everybody's chasing from all over the continent.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it was just showing the different characters how they've navigated that. Chinai and Chamu almost got it. He
Mm-hmm.
with his relationship as well, and he was working towards something, and that dream was also snatched, as happens to many foreigners as well. They can attest to. Somehow you think you have your footing, you establish yourself, and then you lose it. And so it
Mm-hmm.
also shows that sometimes it's not really quite a solid dream. At times it can be fleeting. And so yeah, so it's that, just to show that as well, and that at the end of the day, it's the relationships more than anything that count, and that's where the real gold lies.
Yeah, that is true. And I mean, just to pick up on Chennai and Chamo, I think one of the ways in which that was revealed is their mom, whom, so we talked earlier about the wife that was left behind. These are now children that are going to
their parents.
to find a parent. So they're following a parent, right? And the circumstances of that are heartbreaking. I mean, for me, Chennai, Guguletu, and Lindani are problematic characters for me, which is why I'm not digging deep into them, because there are tragic elements to their story that are very, very, very heartbreaking. And people like Guguletu, who just never had a chance, and the one good chance in terms of her grandmother is the one thing that is taken away from her. And you kind of wonder why, if you're not going to follow through on this. And she just gets shoved from pillar to post in these awful experiences that, as you were talking about, speak about exploitation. But then you've got Chennai and Chamu and Dumusani's relationship. There's a warm place there. But they go to their mother, and we discover that she has built these relationships working as a maid in Johannesburg, and those relationships are very special. So the glimpse you gave us of that, when her voice comes into the story, helped to show that this is some of the goals that you were referring to. We've got Makanaka Mawengere just joined us. Makanaka, thank you so much for joining us. And you said such a great read. I love how she took us on the different journeys and how believable they were. I also love that she took us on the different journeys. That's what propelled me to keep reading, because there were people I needed to know what was going to happen. So there was suspense in that perspective. But for me, they were unbelievable, those journeys, because and this is what I must commend you for in the telling of the story is, I'm a Zimbabwean. I know the migration story very well. I understand that South Africa has our biggest amount of diaspora, followed by the UK, Australia. That also is very much in the book. But I am not well versed with the story of illegal immigrants, because I am one of those people in the book that you refer to, who's crossing the border either in a luxury coach or stepping off a plane. My papers are in order. My experience of crossing the border is completely different. So to me, this book was the first sort of detailed, comprehensive narrative of what it must be like to cross the border without papers, people trekking in the dark, that poor guy who was lost in the river. And, you speak about those sounds and the fear and all of that, and trying not to give too much away. So for me, the story was unbelievable. How did you tell this unbelievable story in a way that is so true, so relatable, so universal? I mean, did you go and collect all of these stories from people? Did you do some research did you actually go and hear from people that this is what happened? How much of it was imagination? How much of it was research based on people's real experiences of these things?
Look, like I've said, all the stories in the book are built on facts. These are things that have happened. And I think the Guguletu story of children being trafficked, that happens a lot. That's why they introduced the unabridged birth certificate. I mean, there was a prominent case documented where kids were found in a bus. They were being sent to their parents over the Christmas period, and Department of Social Development took them. I mean, but if you understand that a lot of Zimbabweans are waiters in restaurants, and they can't take time off to go see their kids over Christmas. So most of the times they'll have them, brought across unaccompanied. It's also that desperation. They want to be with their children, but the circumstances don't allow. But they're also opening up their children, they're vulnerable to attack. So it's capturing those stories. So all those stories are true. I mean, I watched a lot of YouTube documentaries about people crossing illegally. I spoke to drivers who ferry people illegally. So although those things do happen, they're not a lie. Okay, so But like you're saying, if it's removed from your sphere, it's hard to believe that these things do happen, but they do. Maybe not so much anymore now, now in the 2020s, but it was prevalent. I mean, I have family members who came through illegally, so it's not like just making this stuff up. Lindani on the plane to Malaysia. So that's something that happened when I was going to Malaysia. There was actually a woman who was abducted, for carrying drugs. So it's those kind of things that no, this actually happened. I've just storyfied it, and fictionalized it. Because with fiction, then you don't have to be true to the facts to the down to the last line. But yeah, these are all things that have happened, and so I just storyfied it. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And I think that's what makes it probably more scary, the fact that these things have happened. I think and because you actually just want it to be like a little story. Omakuma exists. There are people in no man's land that harm people. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Sue, for shining a light on that, because I think what we all need to be aware of is the existence of these stories and the pain that people are carrying. There are just so many layers there. Because we spoke about child trafficking, and then you also raised the example of Landani in terms of drug trafficking, and she sort of is exploited in her relationship, so she's sort of like from the pot into the fire sort of a trajectory, which is quite sad. And then Chennai also has a similar sort of trajectory, but in Chennai's instance, and this is why I found her quite a tragic figure, is that she just never gets a break. So she just is continually being propelled. It's like she's marked, and this is, she's continually being propelled by this never-ending narrative of violence, of assault, of, and every time it's like she's getting better. She's got a job. Oh wow, she's got this big break. And to me, what is most tragic is that the initial trauma, which caught me by surprise too, when I was reading her story, and I was like, wait, is this happening? And that follows her in a very like you said, visual way. Like we see what it's like for her in her mind, in her relation. She is literally fractured completely. And her silences, as well as when she speaks, speak more than what she's saying or not saying. So she uses the silence in a very interesting way, especially the silence with her mother, and so forth. So Chennai is a very, very tragic figure, and I still can't decide who's more tragic between her and Guguleti for me in terms of the story. But
yeah, they sort of like mirror images. Yeah. So you see, with Chennai, her trauma was never dealt with, and a lot of the times, if childhood trauma is not dealt with, it just follows you into adulthood. It follows you, and so that's her journey, being followed by this trauma. It still haunts her. That's why when she sees her father in the mirror, it's just to show that it's still with her, because it's never dealt with. And unfortunately, with a lot of trauma, it's never dealt with. And you're kind of hoping with Gugulethu maybe it will be dealt with, so that it doesn't follow her into her future as she grows up, because she's a young little girl, So those two are sort of mirror images of each other. Yeah.
Very, very powerful. We've got Fungai Anthony Socks, and he's tuning in from Facebook. I love her aggressiveness and how she's intentional as a brand. Continue to shine, Sue. You are a force, and indeed, Sue, you are a force. And we are loving the light that you are shedding forth. As we come towards the end of the book club, we're going to ask Sue to do a reading for us. But before she does that, can you just share with us a little bit about the publishing journey, the difference between self-publishing and trade publishing, and what tips do you have for aspiring authors out there who are wanting to tell their own stories and, you know, start their conversations that they think are important?
So, you know, I when I went into self-publishing, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about it. I didn't even know you could self-publish. It's after my editor and I, Paula Murray, who edited The Polygamist, tried to find publishers for it, and nobody was interested. So she was like, you know, you can self-publish. It's a viable, you know, avenue. And so I thought, okay. And being a finance person, I did the numbers, and I was like, okay, did my spreadsheet, and I was like, fine, you know, this this can work. And I got an investor as well who put money into the whole publishing thing. And I was like, by my calculations, you know, 6 months we'll have the money back and I'll pay you back. So, you know, I thought, you know, it seems like a fairly straightforward process. But you see, in my naivety, I didn't know how the book trade works. You know, I just had this idea that books will fly off the shelves, and books don't work like that. It's like, you know, and I had no investment in marketing. I didn't understand the distribution part of it, and that you don't distribute at the recommended retail price. There's a wholesale price. So it also actually became a learning curve for me as well, in terms of how books work. And I'll be honest, you know, it moved slowly in the beginning. So you're selling to friends, family, and word of mouth, and it's growing. And then I got a distributor, and they were selling here and there. And yeah, so initially it was a very slow process, you know, and I understood that, you know, you really need to market the, you know, books. They don't just fly off the shelf. And yeah, it took a while to get, even to sell the first, you know, 1,000, I think, of books. But, you know, at some point it did start to pick up. I got a new distributor, and yeah, then it started to move. So yeah, I started to understand the industry more as well. But it was slow. It was a slow start, I won't lie. But by the time we got to the Gold Diggers, I think that helped, because with traditional publishing, they have bigger marketing budgets for books and the exposure. So then people who bought that book then looked at my my backlist and started buying that book. And it also, then there was more interest. Yeah, so for me, it's not easy, but you can, you know, the advantage with self-publishing is you own your copyright, you get a bigger percentage, whereas with traditional publishing, you're just getting a royalty. So you get a bigger share, but, you know, a bigger risk. So when it's successful, you know, it really does pay off. So in that regard, I think it's financially lucrative. But I think we also need to understand that it's not that traditional publishing is not lucrative. I mean, we see authors overseas who are traditional published, but they have lucrative careers. It's because the sales, the sales are bigger there. People are selling 1 million copies of a book because the market is much bigger. I mean, here, when people sell 10,000 copies, it's like, wow. And it shouldn't be a wow, because we should be selling more than that. Why can't we sell 100,000 copies? But that's not happening. And it speaks to the markets. We don't have the markets to buy the books. So that's the unfortunate thing. So yeah, for me, it depends as well what you want to do with your career. Is it just earning revenue, or do you want to become mainstream? I wanted to become a mainstream writer. I just don't want to be known in this market. I'd also like to grow eventually and grow my brand internationally. So that's my end goal. So I think that's why traditional publishing for me is the only way to get there, because a lot of times, you know, self-published authors are marginalized. I mean, you just exist in this other world outside traditional publishing. So yeah, so those are my experiences, having, you know, been both sides. I think it just depends on what your goal is at the end.
That's very good. Always start with your why. Yeah, what is your goal? Rafilwe is messaging us again. Thank you for this chat and celebrating one of my personal favorite writers. She is a favorite of many, I believe. I've enjoyed all her books, from The Polygamist to Family Affair, her character development, her ability to draw you into her stories, and most importantly, her telling our stories are just some of the reasons why I love her. I look forward to more books from you in the future. Cheers to you, Sue. And I do agree, definitely second, the character development is quite powerful, because as rich as this book is in terms of context, themes, settings, and different voices, it's the character development, I would say. You paint them so vividly, and you really do give us a chance to see them grow, and to see redemption for some, and retribution for some. So that's very rewarding, and I love that some of the stories we don't get to finish, because I do think it is the reality of the situation of migration. So as we wrap up, Sue, our custom at the book club is to do a reading with the author. So please share with us your reading to end or close off today's book club discussion.
Okay, do you have a particular page you want me to read, or?
No, it's up to you. Author's choice.
I'll just read from the beginning, because, that's basically, that sets off the journey.
Mm-hmm.
A gleaming white Toyota Phantom with black tinted windows pulled into a vacant parking space opposite Max's garage. Everyone in Bulawayo knew Max's garage. It wasn't just a fuel and service station. It was more like a busy transit terminal. Max's garage was the gateway out of Bulawayo to places like Eskodini, Gwanda, Beitbridge, and Johannesburg. In the same vein, it was also the entry point for those coming in from the southern parts of the country. It welcomed you into the bosom of the City of Kings, a city whose pulse was faltering as its entire body succumbed to an economic malaise. The Inns, a fast food franchise located there, also ensured the place was always bustling with activity. The people who thronged there were an easy target for the con artists, petty criminals, and vendors milling around. From his car, the driver had a vantage of the unfolding action around him. His interest was piqued by a woman sitting on a pavement, a child plugged to her breast, punting overripe bananas to every passerby. How many bananas did she have to sell in a day to break even? Could anyone actually survive on these takings? He shook his head in disdain. Not only was life brutally unfair, it was savagely hard. The thought that in a few minutes he would be driving out of this quagmire gave him a fleeting moment of joy. Fleeting because he would soon return to it, and invariably nothing would have improved. In fact, the city's condition would probably only worsen. This is why the numbers of mobile cargo he carried had increased in the last couple of months. They all had one thing in common: the desire to find refuge in the arms of their South African neighbor. He had listened in on many conversations, many that were grandiose and flowered with adjectives of prosperity, so similar to the one taking place in the back seat. A young man and woman conversed noisily in Shona. They had arrived together and insisted on sitting together. Melusi assumed they were a couple. They continued to chat animatedly. He smirked in disgust. That language should never have even been allowed in Matabeleland. He had aspirations of becoming president one day. He would divide the country along tribal lines: Matabeleland, Manikaland, Mashonaland. Those who did not fit into these three categories would have to squeeze into other land. When he was president, there would be no electricity outages, no fuel shortages, and an uninterrupted supply of running water. Bulawayo would be a thriving city with employment opportunities for all the Ndebele, many of whom were disenfranchised and scraping by in South Africa. A livelihood which they should have easily made from the fruits of this once beautiful land. It now looked like a tired prostitute screwed of all sanity and life. He sneered again and was almost tempted to throw the Shona couple out of the car. It was their fault. They felt the country was in a quandary it was in now. Now they were also making an exodus to South Africa, an exodus he had been forced to make 10 years earlier. Why did they not stay and fix the mess they had created? They still had opportunities here, many that had been denied to him. Yeah, I'll stop there. So that chapter also, establishes, from your quote, the ethnicity and, you know, the different divisions. And you also see that, you know, we have tribal, divisions, and also we have later Africans fighting Africans. It's those same divisions that also get amplified throughout the book as well.
100%. 100%. I mean, yeah, the ethnicity is quite a strong theme there, you know, because you do give a lot of really great historical background to many of the neighborhoods that we go through, Hillbrow, for instance.
Yes.
And, you know, the layers of migration, you know, through different seasons of history as well. But you also do the same with Bulawayo a lot,
yes.
Which I found very rich, very, very rich. So thank you so much, Sue, for that. A very, very powerful conversation about the social issue of migration and what that looks like, and great parallels. Christine and Portia, for instance, Guguletu and Chennai, and many more throughout the book. So amazing, wonderful book, and just one of Sue's books. So those of you who are fans of Sue, or who have just become a fan of Sue from this conversation, join us later on in the month when we will dig deep, and we will do a review of A Family Affair right here on the book club. Otherwise, thank you, Sue, for joining us. Thank you, Tabisa Sabanda, joining us from YouTube. Great interview. Makanaka, thank you. Such a great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. We enjoyed having you with us on a Monday morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody. See you at the
Cheers.
next book club.
Bye.